Hi, Julie here. Just another video tutorial. This time is using some of the images from my own model packs. I've used quite a few owls from Barn Owl Pack 1, and then there is also Barn Owl Pack 2, and I also used one little one from Barn Owl Pack 3, which is this flight one. So let's just get into the image. So this is Midnight Agenda, so that's that little flight one, and then I have the 4 different owls that I used here. So I'm just going to go all the way back to the background, and this is a legacy image. So this is actually a whole heap of different images that I put together and used in another image. So I had all the different books and everything. So this was my base image that I started with. So I did darken it off a bit. Now I added the moon and the forest. The forest is from Pixabay, and I've got it set to lighten at 24%, and I removed it with the layer mask from down the bottom here. The moon is just a one that I had in my collection, and I added a brightness contrast layer to boost the contrast in there, and I put it all in its own little folder. So that was pretty much my image prepped and ready to go. Then I added in the owls, and I had quite a few different things that I had to do, of course, including just trying to make sure everything's turned off, sorry. Of course I had to extract the owl, and let me just go in here. I had to brighten quite a few of them up. So I'm just going to show you this one here for starters. So I've got the owl in, which I extracted just using the quick selection tool and putting a layer mask on it, and then jumping into select a mask just to refine it around the feathers. There is of course a shadow in behind him and under his foot, that is just anchoring him to the books, and there is a curves layer which is adding a bit of contrast and brightening him up quite a bit because he was a little bit dark. And then I also added a blue filter because it was shot outside. The light was very sort of yellow like you get for most natural light, and I just found that it was a bit distracting to the rest of the image, which is actually shot at, well, looked like it was shot at night. So I pretty much did that to each of the owls. Now both of these, there was a letter that I was put in his mouth as well, just zooming in, so it's just a letter which I did a bit of a gradient map over it to give it some shadow, and of course a little shadow under his beak. And they were all pretty much done the same way. Brought them in, extracted them, put a shadow underneath them, added a few layers to brighten them up or darken them up. This guy here has obviously got quite a bit of shadow underneath him, but there is bright light on his face, and again here. So I was just sort of adding different settings to each of them so that the light would hit them from this moon angle out. You've always got to be mindful of where your light is coming from. So I then added a gradient map to the whole image, which was just black and white at 25%. Then a brightness contrast layer where I dropped the contrast and the brightness a bit. I then did a black and white layer, which I set to luminosity, and played with all of my various colours, bringing the blues right out, bringing the reds down, and so forth. I then did a selective colour adjustment as well, which I was playing with various colours. Predominantly what I do is I come in the blacks, in the reds and the yellow, and change them around. I also go into the blacks, and you can come into the whites and play with them as well. So sometimes it's subtle, but it can give quite a big shift. I was then also playing with fixing a few things up. There was some shadows here that I wasn't happy with, so I did a layer and masked them out, put some more shadow under the owl. I then went into Exposure X3 and I did a polychrome layer at 42%. I also added a soft glow to the lantern down here as well. I then did a dodge and burn. I did it on 2 separate layers using a curves layer, just to give it some more definition in some of the areas. I also then did a high pass filter, which I inverted the layer and painted it back in on some of the areas. I didn't want too much detail on some bits. I wanted them quite soft, whereas on the birds and things like that I really wanted to have more detail. A couple of lookup tables, set to 20% soft light. This is tension green, this is soft candlelight. This one is Foggy Night, which I love using. I then added in some textures, a couple of Jai Johnson textures. I then went into lens effects and I added in some fog, which I have reduced right back to 39%. So it's really sort of starting to come together now. This is my lighting layer, so I'll just turn all them off. So I had my fog, I did another curves layer to darken it up a bit. I did another lens flare up here. So if you add, you can do it 2 ways. You can use some of my lighting packs, or if you put in a black layer, so you could come in, solid color, black, and go to filter, render and lens flare. I'm just going to convert that to a smart object so I can re-edit it if I need to. And you've got your different lens flares there. I quite like the 105 prime, and I'm just going to move it up here where I roughly think it wants to be. And that's put my lens flare in, and I can move that around. And what I ended up doing, I'll just delete that, was I did mask out where I didn't want the extra bits, so I didn't want those, but I was quite happy for the glow to happen around the moon. Then of course I also put in another lighting. This is one of mine, set to screen, and that knocks out the black. These are a couple more that I put in from my lighting pack. So there is a few different ones there, and that is a wet look. There's some light leaks, and this one is some little sparkles like stars, and I took some of them out because I thought there were too many, just with the layer mask. I then also did a dark blue exclusion layer at 20%. I then also took it into topaz and gave it a slight painterly look. Took it into Camera Classic in Nick and gave it some vintage effects, which I've got at 25%. It was quite harsh at 100. Oh, I think that's my painterly layer. I got myself confused. So that was taken into topaz impressions and given a painterly effect, which of course is I just wanted a touch of it. Another black and white layer just to tone everything down at 20%, but on normal this time, not on luminosity. And I put a blue photo filter in just to give it that more of a cooler nighttime look. And that's pretty much the finished image. So I had a lot of fun playing with my own model packs, and I did a few pieces with these ours. So thanks for watching, and bye for now.